أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين. In the name of God, most merciful, ever merciful, and may God's peace and blessings be upon His holy Prophet Muhammad and the purified members of his household and progeny. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farajahum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So today, inshallah, we're going to continue with the same topic of the big heading of divine justice and with the subtopics under it, which we have covered until now. So we've talked about free will. We talked about what we mean by qada and qadar. So we said we called them divine decree and predestination. We said what they are and how they work and the different types. And today, inshallah, we're going to getting into the topic of divine justice directly. What do we mean by divine justice? And this opens the door to coming back, inshallah, maybe in a little bit more detail or not. We'll see how it goes today. But we plan to do one more session where we talk a little bit more about different ways to interpret the problem of evil in the world. So today we're going to touch on that, but we're not going to go in too much depth. We're going to give the answer. So whatever we're going to say later is going to be coming back to what we said, what we've already said. If you paid attention, we've already answered it in different ways. But basically we're going to answer it directly this week and start this week and then come back to it next week and expand on it a little bit more. So until now, just to recap very quickly, we said that there were, if you go back in the history of the Muslim or Islamic thought, two big schools of thought emerged to try to deal with these issues of free will and divine justice and all of that. So you don't necessarily need to remember all the words, it's just to know that there are two schools, but that explains a lot that we find even today. So the two big schools of thought we said are called al-Ash'ara because they followed someone who was called al-Ash'ari. Okay, so they became al-Ash'ara, and al-Mu'tazila. Okay, so those who basically separated themselves. I'tizal is to separate. Those who separated themselves, they pulled themselves away from whatever was going on with the Ash'ara. So we said the Ash'ara are always trying to be more scriptural. They go back to the scripture to see what it says and they just want to follow it. They say don't use your mind too much. That causes problems. Don't try to rationalize or over-rationalize things. And we're going to address that today directly. We're going to go to the source of the problem for everything they say. Where does it come from? We're going to talk about it today. And in opposition to them, or as a reaction to that school, of course, another school emerged, the Mu'tazila, which try to make everything rational. So they don't really want to rely. Of course, everybody's relying on the Quran fundamentally. But they want to rely a lot more on rational arguments and rational evidence as opposed to scriptural. Okay? At the end of the day, both are using both. But if you ask them, what is the main type of evidence that you want to use for anything you believe, the Ash'ara are going to say Quran and Sunnah, the Mu'tazila are going to say reason. Okay? So we said there are, if you understand the bottom line, the fundamental issue that triggered alaykum assalam wa rahmatullah, that triggered a lot of the differences between these two schools of thought later, you're going to start understanding why they differed on the things they differed about. And we've talked in passing quickly because the point is not to go back in history. The point is to see how does it apply to us today? How does it help us deal with the same issues that we have today, but we just don't have to necessarily call them, this is an Ash'ari problem, this is a Mu'tazili problem. Okay? But it's the same issues that we have. And so we said the Ash'ara, because they want to rely entirely on the scriptures and they want to give to them the most important issue is the Tawheed. So they say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only one who has real agency, real action in the world. So with that, they derived the notions of al-kalam, kalam Allah. So that created a huge problem. And we talked a little bit about it when we talked about the attributes of Allah. We said, does Allah have speech as one of His actions or not? And is the divine speech created or eternal? That was a huge problem in the Islamic community. And it has no real ramifications on anyone's life. But it's because it was political. The Khalifa of the time, one Khalifa decided that anyone who says, everybody has to live to believe whatever he's believing in. So he decided that the truth of the day, today, I believe that the speech of Allah is eternal. So anyone who does not believe that it's eternal must be killed. And that's what happened. And thousands of people were killed. Okay, this is the time of the Abbasiyin. Okay, Ma'mun, and afterwards they started using those policies. So it's not really about the religious truth or just finding, it's about using religion for political reasons. That's what happened. So today, that problem, because so many people got killed and it was such a big problem at that time, it was added in the books of theology as though it's a huge issue. But really in day-to-day life or even in your belief system, does it really matter whether you say that the divine speech is created or not? It has no ramifications, no repercussions on your life or your belief system. In any case, we said at that time, divine speech is created. It's not eternal. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates whatever type of communication He needs to create to communicate with His creatures. So speech in that sense is a creation. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the ability to communicate. The ability is not the speech itself. So you can't say that the speech is eternal. The speech is an act of creation. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spoke to Musa alayhi salam, for instance, that was an act. It has to be limited with certain things because we live in a limited world. We're limited creatures. Whatever happens at the level of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cannot be given to us as is. We have to go through space and through time and through those limitations. In any case. So one of the big issues was divine kalam. Okay, divine speech. Is it created or not? Another one were other attributes that I'm not going to get into. It's a huge debate how the Asha'ira view that. Attributes, especially the essential, the attributes of essence of Allah. And we talked about them, I'm not going to repeat. That was another very big problem. And the next one is the one that we talked about, which is relevant to our topic, which is their difference about freedom of choice. So the Asha'ira basically do not believe that we're free to act as we want to act. They believe that the only real actor in the world is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And they believe that anyone who does not believe that is falling into shirk, because they believe that there is more than one agent in the world. If you believe that you're creating your own actions, you're the one who is deciding, it's as though you can do and Allah can do. So there's more than one entity that has the ability to do in the world. And we talked at length about that, so I'm not going to go back to that. So their issue is what? They want to emphasize Tawheed. So this is their interpretation of Tawheed. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because He's the only one with true existence, He's the only one with true power to do, and that power is given, it's an accident, it's secondary to any other creature because they have neither existence nor any power. Fire does not burn by itself. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put a certain trait, a certain characteristic, a certain power in these chemicals, in this entity to do what it does. Otherwise it would be like any other entity. Okay? So they want to say it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who's burning, not the fire. And it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who's pulling things down, not gravity. And we talked about that. We're not going to go back to that. So that was the second issue that we said is a huge difference. And the third one we said was the qada and qadar, or divine decree and predestination, and we talked about that too, so I'm not going to repeat. But we basically said, just for us to keep the terminology in mind, we said al-qada is the divine decree, when something is decided and it's final. And al-qadar are the limitations and the steps and the measures and the planning to get something to its final outcome, to its end state. The end state is called al-qada. Al-qadar is the limitations and the planning and the measures to get something to its end state. So they usually go together, because the world we live in, nothing happens like a poof and it just happens. Everything follows the laws of cause and effect. So there are steps to get to it. So if you're talking about qada is the final end result, but of course there was taqdeer or qadar to get it to its qada. And the same thing, the moment you talk about qadar, it means there's going to be a qada at the end. And we talked about the difference between fixed qada and qadar, the ones that don't change, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's pre-eternal knowledge of what the final outcome is going to be, and the ones that change, which are open to us, and we can always play with them. And this act of changing the taqdeer and changing the qada, we called it bada. Okay, so this is the terminology we gave and we explained that topic, so I'm not going to repeat that. We spent 2 hours on it. Okay, so now we want to get into the topic of divine justice. We talked about all of that so that you have it in mind as we get into divine justice. The issue of divine justice was huge in the history of Islamic thought. Right from the beginning, this split between Ash'ara and Mu'tazila had a lot to do with divine justice. To the point where whoever believes in divine justice in this manner, and we're going to have to explain it a little bit more, was actually referred to as a adli. So Muslims in general, between themselves, they started referring to each other as you are either adli or you're not adli. So a group were called al-adliya, in opposition to the others. The others did not say Allah is not just, and we're going to talk about that in a second. But they didn't emphasize it this way. So who are the ones who said Allah adil, although they have different definitions or nuances, different theories that we're not going to get into? They're the Shia and the Mu'tazila. They openly said and maintained, and their theological position is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala adil. Allah may yadhlim. Allah does not commit injustice. So they were referred to at that time, early Islamic theological thought, if we're going back about 10, 11 centuries, 12 centuries ago, there are groups of people who are starting to be called adliya and people who are not adliya. So of course, when you add the political layer to that, there are people who are going to be discriminated against and because they are one or the other. And that was used over the centuries. Why is that important? I'm saying this in passing quickly because in reality, these are lectures or lessons on our belief system. When we started, we said, in reality, we have 3/4 principles of faith or belief. It shouldn't be 5. It should not be Tawheed Adl. It shouldn't be Allah's oneness and then Allah's justice and then prophethood, imamah and ma'ad. Why not imamah? Because usually imamah and nubuwah are one topic. You can't, if you haven't established nubuwah, which inshallah we're going to do very soon, you can't talk about imamah. Imamah is an extension of nubuwah. It's not a standalone topic. If you don't first prove that Muhammad is the prophet and messenger of Allah, there's no point talking about imams who come as successors to him. Okay? So usually nubuwah and imamah are one topic. They're one big topic in theology. Ma'ad, the afterlife, everything related to the afterlife, that we die and that there's a life after death, and everything after that, that's one topic. So now we have 2. We have nubuwah and imamah and religion, that's one topic. We have the afterlife, that's one topic. And we have God. God including all of his traits, characteristics, names, oneness, and adl, justice. So how did it become 5? Is because the issue became so big and so problematic in early Islam to the point where people are now they take the secondary belief, something that is an extension of the previous belief. Really the belief or the principle is there a God and what are his characteristics? What are his traits? What kind of God is it? So one of the traits is Allah Adil, Allah is just. Just like we said, Allah Hakim, Allah Qadir, we talked about them. So why is divine justice different? It became different, one, because it's a complex issue. It's a little bit more complex, but you know what? Divine knowledge is also complex, and divine power is also complex, and divine will is also complex. But maybe this one requires a different approach, but it doesn't really justify considering it a different principle in beliefs. So why did it become its own principle? Really, it's because of the historical reasons. It's because it became such an issue in the lives of those Muslims, early Muslims, to the point where it almost became like a madhab. You are either a adli or you're not a adli. So before we talk about the details, just tell me, are you a adli or not? So adl was basically elevated to the status of being its own principle in faith, when in reality it should have been an extension of Tawheed. You study divine existence, which was not really an issue at that time. maybe around the time of Imam al-Sadiq and onwards, there's more and more people, because Islam opened up so much to other civilizations. You had people coming from India and the Far East who started introducing these questions about atheism and is there really a God or not. Before that, the Arabs, they don't really have people who don't believe in a God. Okay? It may not have been the God of Islam, and a lot of them were polytheists or henotheists, as they call them. So they believe in a lot of and their own gods, but they don't exclude other gods. In any case, atheism was not really a big issue. Today it is. So when we talk about Tawheed, we have to spend a lot of time talking about, is there a God, before we talk about what kind of God is it. So if I don't establish that he exists, why am I talking about his attributes, right? And that's what we did. Kind of the same thing. Today, the issue related to divine justice, the topics we talked about are important, but you have to know how to extract them from the historical discussion, which was not framed in today's terms. Today's terms, free will is a huge issue, but you have to know how to address it and where to bring it up. If you're talking to someone, as we said, who is a materialist, whether they know it or not, the only logical conclusion from their belief system, from their worldview, is that they don't believe in free will. That's the only logical conclusion. And that's why you have people like Sam Harris and others who are open about it. Danielle Dennett, others. These are, the big four, the four horsemen of atheism today, they call them. The big four names in atheism. So Dawkins, Sam Harris, one of them died. So Sam Harris, Dennett, and Dawkins are the ones who are still alive. Hutchins is the other one. They are very open about this. So when he says, consciousness is an illusion. You're not really conscious. There's no such thing. The mind does not work. You're just your brain and the chemical reactions in it, and they give you, for evolutionary and other reasons, they give you the impression that you have consciousness and that you're aware of yourself and. Okay? And that's one topic, and we talked about it. The other one was freedom of choice. That you're not really free. The chemicals in your brain and your genetic code and the way you're raised in society is going to determine what you're going to do next. You might not be aware of it. It's not even happening at your conscious level. And if you already agreed that there is no conscious, per se, then there's no issue. It's just going to happen the way it happens. Your genes already know they're in action. It's action, reaction. It's all chemical. Or it's all genetic. Right? So if you are only a materialist, you do not agree, you do not accept that there is anything beyond matter, then you're stuck in that framework. And then that opens the debate, so what do you do about crime? How do you justify if someone rapes, or someone kills, or someone steals? So they're not free to do what they do. And if they're not free, then they're not responsible for whatever they did. So what do we do with that? Oh, but we have to pretend that we all are good people, we're going to live in a good society, and Richard Dawkins asks everybody to try to be good. Okay, if you read his books, that's what he says. But it's an illogical conclusion. You can't just ask me to be good when we just proved, based on everything we said, that there is no such thing. I believe in free will. So I have no choice to be accountable for everything I do because I'm the one doing it. So therefore, you can tell me, and you can blame me, and you can reward me, and you can punish me, and. As for you, someone who doesn't believe, I'm not the one doing it. My genes are acting alone. Or whatever is happening, the chemical interactions in my mind, and the neurons, and that's what's happening. So anyways, this is a point of these topics, right? The issue of divine justice, as we said, is split into these. So if you know what I'm trying to do, and we're trying to go fast because we're trying to finish now, and we can come back to it in 2 weeks after we take the 2-week break. We can come back to it if there is more need. But what we're trying to do is if we try to address specific questions, then we're only answering those specific questions. What I'm trying to do is to give you a bit more theoretical, conceptual tools that it may look like it's a little bit more boring this way, because it needs more concentration and you have to go back and think about it and see how it applies. But if you understand it properly, then we don't need to sit together and answer 72 questions. You have the keys. So if you apply the principles, you can unlock all of them now. That's it. It just needs a little bit of patience and concentration for 2-3 lectures and we're done. So the next big topic, so we've talked about a couple of them. The next big topic is divine justice. That's a big heading. What do we mean by divine justice? And then the biggest issue today that we're going to finish with today is evil in the world. So before we said in Islam, the manner in which this question was addressed was all under divine justice. Is there, what do we mean by qada and qadar? So divine predestination and decree. What do we mean by free will? So of course it's related to divine justice. Is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just or not? So if I say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave me free will, then I have to say He's going to reward me or punish me based on my free will. And it's going to be matching. So if I do good, because I was free to do good and bad, but I chose good, He's going to reward me because I'm the one who chose this. So there's going to be a reward, not a punishment. And we believe that they go together. Good means reward. Bad means punishment. Okay. So now we have to get to this, which is the central point in this entire belief system. Are we saying that the Asha'ira, who do not believe, did not refer to themselves or were not referred to as Adliya, are we saying that they openly say Allah is not just? No, they don't say that. No Muslim will come out and say Allah is not just. This is what the Adliya claim about the Asha'ira. And the claim is valid, because that's the only logical conclusion. But there's no Ash'ari who will openly say Allah is not just. So where's the issue? And so we have to go to we're going to skip all the back and forth, the discussions and the arguments, and we're going to go to the main question here. The main question is a topic that is usually discussed in philosophy. We're going to try to wrap up in a few minutes today here. That is called, in Arabic, they refer to it as al-husn wal-qubh al-aqli. Okay, so rational good and rational bad. In what sense? The main issue between Asha'ira and Mu'tazila is not whether Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is just or not. And it's not whether we have free will or not. Their main divergence is when they look at the good and when they look at the bad in the world. When I say this is good, like anyone else says this is good, this is bad. Where is this? What's the criteria to say this is good and this is bad? The Mu'tazila say the criteria is your reason. Anyone who has aql, properly functioning thinking, who doesn't make these fallacies and mistakes when they think, are going to rationally be able to reach a conclusion that says this is good or this is bad. This is what the Mu'tazila claim. Okay? So everything, all of their subsequent positions are based on this belief. That you can determine the goodness and the badness of an action, between brackets, including divine action, of any action based on reason. What do the Asha'ira say? Say no. Your reason cannot determine what is good and bad on its own. Why? Because they don't want you to apply your reason to the divine action and impose it on it. So, in more concrete terms, what do we mean? When you do something and I do something, the Asha'ira have no problem with that. Someone comes and says, oh, you did this action, this is a good action. You did that action, that's a bad action. They don't care about that. They say, what's the criteria you used? I use my reason. So are you saying that your reason alone is able to determine good and bad? Say yes. Say, okay, so let's go to God now. Let's look at a divine action. An act of God. We look at a divine action and we say, this action would be good and this action would be bad. If Allah rewards those who do good, this is a good action. And if Allah punishes those who do good, that's a bad action. And here the Asha'ira will come back and say, who are you with your flawed human reason to determine and to impose on Allah that His action is good or bad. You're using your little mind, your human mind, and you want to apply that to the action of God and tell Him that He's not allowed morally to punish those who do good. Who are you and what are you? You're insignificant nothing. And you want to go to Allah and say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can and can't based on your reason? What reason? Your reason works at your level. You can't take it and apply it to your creator. You understand where the issue is? The Mu'tazila say, no, you can apply it. The Ash'ara say you can't. So the Mu'tazila want to rationalize everything. The Mu'tazila consider them kuffar. And the Mu'tazila, when they look at the Ash'ara say, no thinking, we have to apply what's in the scripture, and they end up, according to the Mu'tazila, being mushrikeen. Okay? So those become the two extremes. So what's the solution to all of this? So can we apply the main issue, just to be clear, the main issue becomes, before I tell you is Allah just or not, I have to get to the bottom, the question that started it all. When I look at good and bad, is my human mind capable of discerning, distinguishing clearly and saying this is good, this is bad, when it looks like at an action? So are good and bad intrinsic? That's the reality. It's not about aqli or not. Aqli is the tool. When I look at an action, does the action carry within itself its goodness and badness? Example. You're in your car, you go to a traffic light, and it's red. And for whatever reason, you decide to still cross. You're not supposed to, but you do it. Let's look at the action. The thing in itself, before you cross, the thing in itself is that there's a light, and someone decided that we're going to put a light here, we're going to create a system so that we organize ourselves and people don't keep dying in the middle of the street and collide into each other. We're going to create this system, we're going to put lights. If it's green, you go, if it's red, you stop. So in itself, in the universe, in the world, on its own, does a red light on its own, is it a good thing or a bad thing? On its own. It's neither. How did it become good or bad? Someone just decided. So we call that a convention. We decided by convention. We sat together by consensus. We either all together decided, or someone, a king, a monarch, a tyrant, or someone that everybody has agreed to give them power, has made a law. A law. So it's a convention. A law is a convention. That's a big topic in the philosophy of law. Where does the authority of the law come from? Who decides? Anyways. So when you look at the thing in itself, the red light in itself, no one is going to say it carries its goodness or its badness within itself. It's not intrinsic. It's not essential to it. It's by convention. Tomorrow society can decide to completely reverse it and say you go when it's red and you stop when it's green. No issue with that. Right? If, on the opposite hand, if you see someone, a little child, sitting somewhere, I don't know, and they have an apple, and someone comes and nabs the apple from the child and walks away. A normal human being, when they look at that, do they say this is neutral, like someone, going through a red light before we add the convention part? Is it the same type of act? Or when you look at that act, you say there's something intrinsic in the act that makes me say this was wrong, this was bad, versus something else which is good. Someone else might come, reprimand, punish, steal, hit that person, take the apple, give it back to the child. And someone will say, oh, that's good. You reestablish justice. Right? So any human being who looks at this, if they understand what's going on, they should say, on its own, you're not going to say someone somewhere had to sit and think and decide and impose on society that this is good and this is bad. Like they had to do with the traffic light. Right? That was a convention. The source of the convention can be anything, so long as we agree it's a convention. It's something added from the outside to it. Otherwise, on its own, it doesn't carry good or bad. Why are we talking about this? We go back to the acts that we see in the world. When a human being does an act, do we consider it good and bad on its own or not? So here, the Mu'tazila, because they want to rely on their reason, and including the Shia, here we agree with them, generally speaking. When we look at a human act, the human act in itself, we say intrinsically in itself, it carries its own good or bad. If it is a type of act that carries good or bad. There are neutral acts. If I just sit here and drink water, I can add interpretation to it, but on its own, there's no good or bad. It's just a neutral act. Okay, but the actions that can carry good and bad, they carry the good and bad within themselves. Seems logical because the majority of human beings live this way. So we're spending a lot of time talking about this. The problem is the Ash'ara don't agree. They say that when the human being steals, it's not bad in itself. When the human being lies, it's not bad in itself. It's not intrinsically bad. Why did it become bad? Because of a convention. Which convention? Not society, Allah. Lying became bad because Allah said that lying is bad. Stealing became bad because Allah said that stealing is bad. You understand? An action in itself does not carry good or bad. It becomes good or bad after God makes it so. And that's the reason, if you understand this properly, that's the reason they will reject your reasoning that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to reward those who do good and punish those who do bad. Because you're imposing your own intrinsic values, your own, whatever you want to call it, reasoning about good and bad on the divine action. And they say, no, the divine action is what determines if something is good. If it's good, it's because Allah made it good. So in reality, what they're saying is whatever Allah does, that becomes the good. And whatever Allah says is good, the good, that becomes the good. So if Allah takes the good people and dumps them in hell, because Allah did it, that's the good. End of story. Don't rationalize. If you do your own posing, your own reason on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That, if you understand that issue, I know we spent a lot of time on it, but it's a complex one and it's nuanced. You understand the whole history of the issues that derived from that. So including free will, and including Jabr and Tafweed, and including Qada and Qadar, and what we're saying about divine justice. So that was the big split. Today, is that a big issue? No, it's not that big of an issue. But this still becomes key to help us understand a lot of things. Because today we do need to determine, when you're living in a society, where does the good and bad come from? We need to agree as a society. Is it good and bad because we just decide? Then that changes everything. Because we can sit here and decide whatever we want. And if we agree on it, who cares? We agreed. Democratically, we all agreed. And there's full freedom about everything. Because in itself, it doesn't carry values. It doesn't carry good and bad. We decide together. But if you say no, good and bad are intrinsic to the act and to the realities of the world. And your mind is not imposing anything on anyone. Your mind, the magic ability of your mind, your superpower in your mind, can do only one thing. It can uncover, it can unveil the reality of the thing. It's not imposing. When you say this is good, you're not saying I'm going to impose what I consider good on the act. What your magic power is, what your superpower is with your mind, is as though there's something behind a curtain and your mind is able to remove the curtain and see behind it. So in this case, what you're seeing is it good or bad in itself? Your mind has that capacity. When it sees the act, when it sees a person stealing the apple from the child, It's able to look beyond the act and add a value to it. And that value is not being imposed by your mind. Your mind is uncovering it. It's already there. So if you understand that, then you will not come back and say you're imposing the values of your mind on Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave you a power, gave you a faculty, an ability to uncover the thing in itself. And that includes the divine action. Okay? So you're not saying that whatever my little human mind decides is the good. You're not deciding anything. Your human mind uncovers the reality. And if it can't, our claim is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us this ability to be able to live. And that opens the door to a huge question, basically the question in moral philosophy and as a secondary layer in the philosophy of law, but really in ethics and moral philosophy. Where does the good and bad come from? Where do these notions come from? And we talked a little bit about that, although we didn't explain it in depth because it would require some good lectures, and inshallah we'll come back to it when we talk about ethics. But we said there are huge philosophers, they rejected every other idea, every other argument, every other piece of evidence to prove the existence of God. They rejected them all, including one huge who's considered the most intellectual rationalist, Immanuel Kant. He rejected all of the arguments at the end. He came after all of them. He wrote in the 1860s and onward. Yet, he added his argument was the fact that there is good in the world, and the fact that human beings can recognize the good means there is a God. This is why if you understand this topic, you've basically opened a huge door. Because the notions of good and bad need an explanation. Why is it that a human being, and we spend a lot of time on this, recognizes good and bad? Does an animal recognize good and bad? You can train an animal but it's a behavioral thing. It's an action-reaction. You want a cookie, you want a biscuit, you want a whatever, you do this. You want my love, you want my attention, you want me to, touch your head, you do this. It's not the animal knowing that this is good, understanding that this is good or this is bad. It's an action-reaction. But human beings, they understand this. This is a huge qualitative difference, in kind difference, not in degree. It's not that humans understand more than animals, this is good and this is bad. A little child will still be able to understand, this was unjust. You should not have taken his apple. And they might even be traumatized the first time they see it in front of them. And they're a child. A chimpanzee won't. As smart as they say they are. A dolphin won't. A whale won't. A crow won't. These are the smartest animals. A parrot won't. They will never be able to add the ethical value, the moral value to the action and say this is good, this is bad. There's no good and bad in their world. So where does it come from in the human being? And the more fundamental question is, once we agree it's there, why is it there? So if you believe in evolutionary theory to explain everything, then you need to find an evolutionary reason for it. And there are huge attempts at that. Of course, I don't think that they're valid, but we would have to spend time talking about ethics. Inshallah, we will, after we talk about belief system. Okay, so all of that to say, the fundamental question was not, is God just or not? It's when they look at an action, can your reason determine if it's good or bad on its own or not? If it can, you're adli. You end up being adli. Because you say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will only do things that are good in themselves because that's His nature. And that's the fundamental thing that I don't want to spend too much time on. I think we've already talked enough about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His attributes of essence. Basically, and divine action has to be compatible with, because it derives from the attributes of essence. Okay? So if you understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all-powerful and all-knowledgeable and He has a free will and, then out of that can only come acts that are purposeful and that are compatible with all the attributes. And you cannot find injustice in that. in there. Okay. So that's, I had a couple of verses that I just wanted to mention very quickly. Because sometimes, that's the, let's say, the more rational explanation. Let's add a couple of verses to that. So this is Surah 7, it's what, Surah Al-A'raf. Verse 33, it says, "Say, my Lord has only forbidden indecencies." It's a longer verse, but this is the part that is relevant. It means that there are things that are in themselves indecent, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala recognizes that they are indecent and that He forbids them. The Quran is not saying that the act in itself is neutral and Allah is telling you, I have decreed that this is indecent. No. The act in itself is indecent and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbids it. Say, my Lord has only forbidden indecencies, the outward among them and the inward ones. So the ones you clearly see right away and the ones that are more hidden. They're more spiritual indecencies. And sin, and undue aggression, and that you should ascribe to Allah partners for which He has not sent down any authority, and that you should attribute to Allah what you do not know. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala here is listing the things that are indecent or sins. He lists them. So He says there's aggression, ascribing to Allah partners, and. But the verse starts with the idea that the indecent thing is indecent in itself. Indeed, Allah commands, this is another verse, chapter 16, Surah Al-Nahl, verse 90. Indeed, Allah commands justice and kindness and generosity. In Arabic, إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى. It means what? It means that there is something that everybody who listens to the verse knows. Oh, okay, so what is your religion? You say, إن الله يأمر بالعدل. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala orders me to be just. It means what? It means everybody recognizes the type of behavior that falls under this, and you're saying, my religion tells me this is my order. I have to do ihsan. Okay? The kindness, let's call it kindness or charitable generosity. This is my religion. Which means what? Which means that in itself, everybody recognizes that it is a good thing. And I'm saying this is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the order. You add the convention, the scriptural convention, the narration or the verse of the Quran is a second layer on top. But in itself, everybody knows this is ihsan. Everybody knows this is adl. It didn't become adl because Allah said it's adl. This is the point. Okay, this is why we're reading these verses. Another verse says, when they commit an indecency, so they know that it's an indecency because they've committed it, they say, we found our fathers practicing it, Allah has commanded us to do so. Say, indeed, Allah does not command indecencies. Do you attribute to Allah what you do not know? This is again Surah Al-A'raf, verse 28. And then in Nahj al-Balagha, Imam Ali alayhi salam, he has this letter where he talks to Imam al-Hasan. He wrote a letter to Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam, and in it he says, when you have understood this, then you should do that which is done by someone like you in insignificance. And then he continues, for indeed He does not command you except virtue. Which means you recognize virtue in itself, and then you're adding a layer which is Allah commands you to do that, which is virtuous. Okay? And He does not prohibit you except from evil. Which means everybody agrees there's something that is evil, and you're adding now the religious component to it. This completely changes the way you view religion. You're basically saying human beings have a capacity to recognize the intrinsic moral value of actions. That they are good or bad in themselves, and then religion comes to confirm and to create a system around them and to put limits and to say, here it's gray, here it's black and white. Here you may not have the ability to determine where it becomes wrong and where it's right. So I'm going to tell you, okay, this is a convention added to it. But the main notion that actions are good and bad, and that generally speaking, the big things that we consider the sins, or the big things that everybody considers kindness or generosity or any human being should be able to recognize them. So this is our position. This is what we believe in. And now we're saying, and this is what the Quran says too. It would be very difficult for someone to prove the opposite when reading these verses. Right? Did you have a question, or we keep moving?
I just wanted to ask about, because you said how all humans have the ability to know what is good and what is bad, and then I had a question about like, what about moral dilemmas?
Yeah, but that's why they are moral dilemmas,
Yeah.
and that's why I'm saying there are areas that are going to be gray. Everybody has the tools. Everybody can run, but not everybody can run in the same way with the same speed and the same. This is where you're going to see a predisposition. You're going to see a difference between people who have a more mature and more nuanced and more sophisticated thinking as opposed to someone else. Okay. So we are at 45 minutes. Okay, so maybe before, let me add one more layer and then we can stop. And then we continue it next week. It's not too long. If you need to go, you can go anytime. Oh, no? Okay. Okay, so divine justice now. So that was the more theoretical stuff that we needed to get out of the way. Okay, it should get a little bit more concrete now. Everybody's eyes are red, I know. I can see you. If you wear shades, maybe you can hide them more. When we say adl, because everybody has the Arabic in the background, when we say adl, linguistically what we mean is an equal sign. This is what we, at a very simplistic way, simple way of thinking, adl means equal. But this is only in the linguistic definition. And even in reality, if you come to a legal system, for instance, no one believes that justice equals an equal sign. Justice is not equal to equality. Equality, or the just equality that everybody should believe in, is not that everything is the same. Because now we need to understand this notion of justice. So maybe linguistically, our starting point looks like we're talking about an equal sign. So everything is equal to everything. In the terminology or in the field we're talking about, this is not what we mean when we say adala or adl. We haven't applied it yet to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We're just talking about the notion of adl, of justice. And in our everyday life, no one lives in a way thinking that everything has to be equal to everything else. That does not work. This does not even work at the conventional level, does not work in the moral system, it does not work in anywhere. Either we say, for things that are just, one way to present them is to present it based on a rights theory. Okay, it's more of a legal theory, which is being just is giving everything what its right is. It has a right to have a thing, that's what you give it. It's my right, and that's why you have a charter of rights. It's my right to have a freedom, to believe and to live where you want, and to associate with whoever you want, and. These are rights given to you. So one way to understand justice, to be just, is to give every entity the rights that it's worthy of having, that they're entitled to. The issue with this is that now you are imposing a notion of right on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as though the creatures of Allah have a right on Allah. Okay? So if you want to say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I have a right as a creature, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has to give me what I'm owed, what I'm entitled to. Here are my rights. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give them to me. That would be problematic according to Tawheed. You don't really have rights in that sense against Allah. So while this works at a logical level, it crumbles when you keep going into Tawheed and basically the ethics of dealing with Allah. If we want to add that kind of terminology, that becomes problematic. Okay, so I'm not saying there are scholars who present the divine justice when they say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala adil, it's every creature has rights and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives to every creature whatever is due to them based on their rights. Okay, but we're saying this is a very simplistic way and it's not really proper etiquette with Allah to say it that way. And in fact, it's very problematic because you're saying that there are rights that a creature has and I've given you this example a lot. Let's say you now decide in your mind, right now, I can ask you, I would say close your eyes, but I'm afraid everybody's going to just sleep. So I'm going to say, imagine, without closing your eyes, imagine, you create an entity, an android, a human being, you create them in your mind. Can someone come and tell you, and that creature, that virtual image, mental image that you created, has these rights that you have to give them? No, they don't. They are your creation. They rely on you entirely for everything in every way. No one can come and say, you were not allowed to. I can do whatever I want to it. I can decapitate it, I can mix it up, I can combine it with a donkey, I can do whatever I want in my mind, right? And no one should come and say you're not allowed to do that because, you're transgressing the rights of the mental image you created. If you really understand that, then you understand what we mean when we say we're creatures of Allah. You have no rights. No.
What about like when God promises you something in return for doing something?
That's different.
Reward.
He promised you. Like you.
Wouldn't it be a right for me to receive the reward that He promised?
No, it's not a right.
Okay, but if he didn't give it to me, I'm really sorry. I have to excuse myself.
Go. Yes, take care. No, here it's different. You just added a layer, and we're going to come to that because that's going to be our ultimate conclusion and solution to a lot of the problems. But we can spill the beans right now. No, let's spill the beans. Hatta you don't leave with the thing hanging in your mind. So the issue is, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told you. You're saying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised you. You can promise the little banam that you created in your mind, you can promise it certain things. There's no right. There's no right.
Okay, but I also promise that I'm just.
No, so that's different. Now, it's you who's promising. So everything is going to depend on what kind of entity are you.
Yeah, but
when you promise, so now it would be unworthy. It would not be becoming of that type of entity to break a promise. But you or me, I may actually break a promise with the little thing I created in my mind. Say, what are you going to do? I decided to, replace your head with a pumpkin. And you say, you can't do that. You promised me you wouldn't. Well, I felt like it. Understand? Yeah. But we say, and so we add that at a rational level, we argue that. We say this is not becoming of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to do that. Although He can. But it's not a matter of right or not right. It's because He promised. And when Allah promised, it's not like me promising. And then we add the scriptural layer. So rationally we say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it would be unbecoming of Him to break His promise. And then we go and we see the Quran, for instance. The Quran promises, it says, وَمَا رَبُّكَ بِظَلَّامٍ لِلْعَبِيدِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I will never be unjust towards any of my creatures. He's making a promise. He's promising, you're good, I will reward you. And I will reward you more. And if you're bad, I will only give you what you did. I will not do more. That's when you understand this, then you understand how the Imams, for instance, in the Ad'iyah, when they talk to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what they're saying. They're saying, I want you, I beseech you, I implore you, do not treat me with your justice. Treat me with your mercy. I understand your justice, and it's good. It's a good system, and I have no objections against it. But what I need is your mercy. I have to go a lot more than just justice. I need a lot more than what I'm entitled to based on your justice. I haven't done enough to be worthy of everything else I want from you based on your justice. And they're not saying He's not just. There's no issue with that. The issue is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised things. Can He break? Of course He can break His promise. So the solution is, one, at a rational level, is it becoming of Allah to break His promise? The type of entity that He is, would He ever break a promise? No, He wouldn't. And always the reasons that we give to answer this question fall under, if we want to turn it into a negative. So how do you turn it into a negative? You go at the essential attributes of Allah. So let's take three big ones. Knowledge, power, wisdom. someone who says Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may commit an injustice, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may break a promise. Whatever is the may is, I'm going to ask them based on the type of creature, the type of entity that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. So to make it very concrete, I drill down to these three essential attributes of essence. This is the essence of Allah. Three angles. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you're claiming that Allah breaks a promise, there has to be a reason. What's the reason? If you claim Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may commit an injustice, there has to be a reason. What's the reason? One possible reason is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't know. He didn't know. But this would contradict his knowledge. So based on knowledge, you can't use the argument that he didn't know. Okay. He knew, but he couldn't help. Couldn't help it. Like, I may know, let's say my hands are attached and I know this is good for me, but someone attached my hands and I can't drink it. I have the knowledge, but I don't have the power. So Allah knows, but for whatever reason, He can't. Allah knows that this is injustice, but He can't help Himself. Allah knows this is something that would be really good, but He just can't do it. But this would contradict divine power, which we have to have properly established as we have before. So what's left? He can. First is He knows, and He can. He just doesn't feel like it. Or to put it more in technically accurate terms, the will is not there. He doesn't have the will to do the right thing. Or he wants to will the wrong thing, or the unjust thing, or breaking the promise. And this goes back to wisdom, where we established that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not act without purpose. And He explains the purposes with which He acts. And the ultimate why can never be known, because He is infinite and absolute, and we're not. We'll never be able to understand it. It's just like the little guy in your mind. We'll never really understand with all your complexity how and why, the ultimate why. Why did you create it that manner? And in the case of a human being, we can explain it. But we can't do it for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The ultimate why. Okay? So we said Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if we're saying that He is just, we can't say that it means that everything has equal. There's no equal sign. So if that's one. Two, if it's not an equal sign, is it a matter of right? We said that would not really be the most appropriate way to explain it. So what's left? So we have to make it a little bit more abstract, and we have to say that every type of creature, once Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decided that He's going to create it, there are things that are suitable for it and things that are not suitable for it. Based on what they're suitable or not? Based on the purpose of that creature. Why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala create that type of creature? So me as a human being, why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala create me? I have to think about that. What's the purpose of my creation? What am I supposed to do? Whatever that is, then wisdom entails that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives me, grants me the things I need so that I can accomplish the purpose for which I was created. Which in philosophy we call the perfection. I reach my perfection. Every creature has its perfection. The perfection of the seed is to become, let's say, a plant or a tree. Okay? But in philosophy they call it perfection because you want to apply it to a human being and it's so much deeper than a seed becoming a tree, for instance. So they use this other terminology. So they refer to it as a perfection. But really it's you reach the end for which you were created. And the more fully you reach it, the more perfect you are. So when you go to a human being and you analyze them, of course there's a physical dimension. And you can add, that to the human being and say, this is their perfection at a human physical level. Yeah, but what about the other dimensions? So what is the perfection in terms of psychology or in terms of spirituality? What is that perfection or the purpose for which the human being was created? So ultimately here, to understand where the act would be considered just or not just, here's where we have to go into the purpose. depending on the purpose of that entity, the reason for which they were created, what they're supposed to accomplish as that type of entity, then I have to look at what have they been given. Have they been given things that impede, that stop them, that prevent them from reaching? That would be unjust. If they've been given the things that they need to reach their perfection, that would be just. So this is the explanation by wisdom. So when we say divine justice, what we mean is either a special kind of divine wisdom that has to do with these types of issues, or it is just simply divine wisdom. So either we consider divine justice a type of divine wisdom, or we say it is divine wisdom. It's not a type of, it is equal to. That helps us understand divine justice. The rest, I think we're going to keep to next time, because you guys are all dead right now. Okay? And it's going to get a lot more complicated. I need you awake for the next part. Okay? وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين.